to hear about with this bill, but on line 14, the word but no should be but not. I do anticipate that we will be working on a possible amendment for this committee to having it prepared for your consideration, working with the other advocates, but that's what this section does. Section 4 on the next page also seeks to do that as well in section 4. Sections 2 and 3, it's my understanding, working with physicians from New Hampshire Hospital, that they identified U.S. Supreme Court decision to try to align current terminology around the definition of, rather not the definition, but in that section, striking the words suffer from mental disorder and replacing it with continue to suffer significant impairment due to psychiatric illness. We're not attempting to touch the definition of insanity. You may recall we had an ill-fated bill, although well-intended, last session to looking at the issue of insanity, insane person. That definition still arises from 1918. I'll repeat that again, 1918. We're in the Great War at the time. And it does need to be looked at, but that's not what this bill is attempting to do. This bill simply is to really focus on allowing free clinical decision-making at New Hampshire Hospital. If it turns out working with the Attorney General's office, which we have not only great respect, but they are the ones who articulate the legal viewpoint for the state of New Hampshire, we're certainly going to be listening to them very clearly and working very closely with them to see what we can do relative to sections 2 and 3 of the bill. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Mouchette, and also if I could invite up also Cynthia Balbonis, if she could join her, because it was originally intended for the two of them to testify together. I came up just from the procedural standpoint, given that we do need to engage stakeholders very earnestly at this juncture.
Come on up. Thank you, John.
Much taller than I. Good morning, Chairman Birdsell and members of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. I am Dr. Andrea Mouchette. I go by Dre or Dr. Dre. I'm the Chief of Forensic Services at New Hampshire Hospital, and I've been working with the not guilty by reason of insanity patients for over the last 5 years. In addition to what John said and Grant for Senator Carson, I just wanted to emphasize a few more important points. The NGRI verdict acknowledges that the person has a serious mental illness at the time of their index offense, and they are court-ordered into treatment that focuses on their risk management, rehabilitation, recovery, and community reintegration. Currently, the statute reads that the Department of Corrections has to approve treatment decisions, granting of their supervision status changes or privileges, assessing readiness for discharge, and recommending discharge to the Superior Court. The Department of Corrections administrative approval process prolongs the NGRI patient's treatment progression from anywhere from 45 days to 6 months for each of the 6 steps while they consider each request. These changes in their supervision allows the treatment team to assess each patient's progress. This not only has a profound effect on the NGRI patient's treatment, but it also delays transition to the next phase of their care, limiting bed availability for New Hampshire's acutely mentally ill, a crisis in which this body is no doubt familiar with, that creates a substantial unnecessary administrative burden to the Department of Corrections and Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the state of New Hampshire as a whole. The majority of the NGRI patients are transferred from the men's prison at the secured psychiatric unit. When they transfer to us, they are psychiatrically stable and safe. Yet they continue to remain at New Hampshire Hospital for a number of years, for multiple years. The changes proposed in this bill will help to significantly increase the number of available beds to those who are in crisis and are being housed in our emergency departments that could be admitted to New Hampshire Hospital. Nationally, 43 states that utilize the NGRI verdict, 42 states have the Department of Health and Human Services or similar departments responsible for the care, custody, treatment of NGRI acquittees, with New Hampshire being the only state where the Department of Corrections is in charge of the NGRIs. In addition, in New Hampshire, the NGRIs are confined to the men's prison at the secured psychiatric unit, and upon discharge, then they are assigned a probation or parole officer. Whereas in other states, they're placed in a forensic hospital or a psychiatric hospital for their care and treatment, and they're not assigned a probation or parole officer on their discharge due to their status. of being not guilty. Again, I want to thank you for your time this morning, Chairman Birdsell and members of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. We have an obligation to treat the insanity equities in the most appropriate and least restrictive treatment setting, and for the judicial system to make the most informed decision possible. Therefore, statutory change is necessary to eliminate discrimination and segregations of individuals with mental disabilities. Supporting our efforts today, we have the National Alliance of Mental Illness, Disability Rights Center, Office of Public Guardian, New Hampshire Psychological Association, New Hampshire Psychiatric Society, and other community members. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Babonis. I'm the Director of Social Work at New Hampshire Hospital and one of the executive team members. And I just want to add to what Dre has already testified to, that the primary goal of this bill is to help New Hampshire Hospital move through the treatment process with the patients that come to us from on an NGRI. I do want to clarify something Mr. Williams said, which is that we do treat the NGRI patients differently than the other patients, and that's because they pose a higher risk to the community. We take that responsibility very seriously, so we have an internal risk management process that we review all of these patients through, even to decrease their supervision level. I also want to just reiterate that we usually, on average, have about 30 people waiting for a bed at New Hampshire Hospital. On any given day, we have 50 to 70 people at New Hampshire Hospital who are psychiatrically stable and ready for discharge to a less restrictive environment. So I think this bill would help us provide treatment to people who are waiting in the emergency room to come to New Hampshire Hospital. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you just repeat that number of the folks that are waiting for discharge?
50 to 70. And it's been that way for years.
Follow up?
Follow
And
up.
what's the breakdown of those patients? How many of them are the NG? So of the 50 to 70, what's the breakdown of like, why are they waiting?
A lot of patients are waiting for a group home, transitional housing, or an apartment.
Last follow up?
Follow up.
And the barrier to that is there isn't a group home, there isn't transitional living, or there's not a spot in existing.
There's
one
no
that we can
apartment
work
for
with.
them. I mean, our patients are subject to the same housing challenges as the rest of our community.
Thank you.
Senator Abar.
But I didn't get the number of how many NGI are of that 50 and 70.
It can range anywhere from 13 in the hospital to 5, depending on the given day.
Thank you.
And if I could just add, the length of stay is important in that calculation because the average length of stay for any person coming to New Hampshire Hospital for stabilization is less than 30 days. It's usually weeks and not years. And so in this, relative to the NGRI population, they're usually there for years. If they're stable for years, that's a bed that can be used many times over by somebody who's waiting in an emergency room.
Any other questions? Senator Bradley.
How do you ensure that NGRI patients are actually safe to be released even into transitional housing or community housing? Is there anything in here going to change that evaluation?
No, sir. We're still going to continue to work collaboratively with the Department of Corrections. And as treatment team finds it necessary for the patient, once they've reached clinical and behavioral stability, then we proceed with a risk assessment. And then that recommends whether it's transitional housing or whatnot. And then we have to go through Superior Court because ultimately, despite any process, Superior Court is the ultimate decider of if they step down or if they transition out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you just, if you can quickly, run through the current process that you have now and what the proposed process would be?
The current process we have now, per statute, the NGRIs come to New Hampshire Hospital from the secured psychiatric unit at the men's prison. Then they stay with us for a number of years. The average currently is probably around 3 years average. And we take them through a stepwise process. So if they demonstrate clinical and behavioral stability, then we're able to have like escort in the building within the hospital so they can go to the library, gym group, rec room, walk outside in the tea garden, secured area. And then as they progress and continue to do well, continue to do groups on the unit and off the unit, then we can then let them be unsupervised in the building within the hospital setting to see how well they can do, how they can display their independence in a clinical setting, or how's their interpersonal skills, how's their social skills. We have a cafe. Are they able to, manage their money? How are they with, talking with people? Then there's a next phase where they are escorted outside the building with staff so that they can walk around the building. Probably not, well, not yesterday for sure, but today hopefully. And then there's a next step where we take them out into the community with staff so that they can demonstrate again, they can be out in the community, they can stay safe and practice their social skills, financial skills. And then if there is family involvement, with Superior Court approval and DOC approval, we try to see if families can come take them maybe out in the community to see how they're doing and, do well with that. And then the next phase is obviously discharge.
And the current, the proposed process?
The proposed process would let us be able to make those decisions without having a delay from administrative approval from Department of Corrections. So having it
Okay.
on the clinical staff to say, yes, we assess them every day for their safety and say, yes, they can go to the library. Yes, they can go walk around the building with staff.
Oh,
And so with the current process, we propose that to Department of Corrections and we say, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so is doing very well. They've demonstrated the following. Can we then have that next step? And that's what kind of is the lag process. It can go anywhere from 45 days to 6 months to get that back to then grant them that particular supervision status or privilege. It's kind of like the old terminology.
okay, so the process itself is not going to change. It's just that in-between time going back to corrections.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank
Or
you.
yes.
Got that. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none? Thank you.
And then Chairman Birdsell, I just wanted to recognize in the audience, we have a psychiatrist, Dr. Samantha Sweater, who came here she's with New Hampshire Hospital. And also we have Debbie Robinson, who is a wonderful administrator that I just got to meet this morning. And we have a couple of medical students from Dartmouth. So they're either seeing an example of best practices for doing legislation or other examples.
Thank you, John. I do see Deborah Robinson here. She's supporting, not speaking. Paula Mattis from the Department of Corrections.
Good morning.
Morning, welcome.
Good morning, Senator Birdsell and committee members. Haven't seen some of you in a while. I'm Paula Mattis. I'm the Director of Medical and Forensic Services with the New Hampshire Department of Corrections. I have been working in the state mental health system for over 30 years, working in community mental health, working at one of the private hospitals in their psychiatric unit, over a decade at New Hampshire Hospital, and now almost to the day, 8 years in this position at the New Hampshire Department of Corrections. We appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. We do have written testimony, which, thank you for passing that out, has been passed to you. So I won't be reading that to you because that's no fun for anybody. I think anything that we are going to preface, anything that's written in here should be prefaced by a couple of things. I think it's important to know that until right before this hearing started, we, the Department of Corrections, did not have a conversation with DHHS about our concerns. And as you can see by the testimony, we oppose this legislation, this proposed legislation. It is also important, I think, for the committee to understand that, and Senator Bradley, you brought this question up in an indirect way, or maybe more direct than I perceived it, but that the safety issues with NGRIs is of critical concern. The New Hampshire Department of Corrections, by statute, is ultimately charged with oversight of this population of people. So when you look at changing any bit of the statute that pertains to that, it can have that effect of pulling a thread and unraveling things. For example, and we've already discussed this, the wording that they have used in here about continues to suffer significant impairment due to psychiatric illness. Changing it from what is in this part of the statute, suffers from mental disorder. That terminology, suffering from mental disorder, is used some 25 times throughout the RSA. So if it were changed here, it would have a rippling effect that could cause a lot of confusion. The other piece I think it's important to know is that I learned, again, prior to this session starting, that there is as characterized by Dr. Mouchette, a 45-day to 6-month wait for administrative issues from the New Hampshire Department of Corrections. I'm baffled by that. It's the first I've heard of it. Yes, the reports we have to read are lengthy, and I do take the time to read them. It can sometimes take me up to 2 hours to read the reports, and the commissioner probably the same amount of time, but we generally turn those around back to the NGRI coordinator within 24 business hours. So by that, I mean 3 days. So I don't understand where this delay is. I think it's a problem that can be reviewed and looked at and solved without statutory changes. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with DHHS on that. I think the biggest concern we have is that while the characterization that they are not allowed to treat the patients as they wish, I think is somewhat unfair because we have oversight. So we're studying records, we're talking to the patient, we're talking to the staff, but we don't interfere with treatment while they're at the New Hampshire hospital. What we do have to do is, again, by law, report back to the court, follow the court orders, and make sure that we are operating within the confines of law and orders issued by the court. And that does take time. No one here will tell you differently. It takes time, but we do it right. It is an interesting intersection of agencies. You know, there is the public safety aspect, there's the rehab aspect, because to become NGRI, as the esteemed committee may know, the person does say they committed a crime, that I did something. Typically it's murder or something of very serious nature. And I had a mental disorder. Again, we all agree on the antiquated verbiage there, but it's what's in statute at the time of my crime. Sometimes by the time this is adjudicated and they go to the secure psychiatric unit, they're in much better shape and we move them through as quickly as we can because we too share with our colleagues at New Hampshire Hospital the belief in least restrictive alternative, but it is mitigated by the public safety responsibility that is thrust, again by law, on the New Hampshire Department of Corrections. We take that seriously. We have a full-time NGRI coordinator. That's her entire job. That's all she does, is working with the patients and the universe that surrounds these individuals to ensure public safety, to ensure treatment needs are met. With regard to numbers, we're all watch with great sadness as New Hampshire Hospital and other psychiatric facilities and outpatient centers struggle with the influx of patients and the appears to be ever-growing workforce shortage. But the number of NGRI patients won't affect that 50 to 70 in a dramatic way. Today, as we sit here, there are 5 NGRI patients. I unfortunately can't tell you the exact length of time they've all been there. Sometimes it is years, again, because where do they go? We're grateful that New Hampshire Hospital has the PATH program where some of these folks can be transferred to. But even then, there may be a logjam there. That being said, we oppose the bill as written. We believe, based on our conversations prior to this meeting, that many of the issues they brought up can be managed without statutory or even rule changes, that there may be some issues with regard to communication. There may be some issues with regard to the court process that we could work with the Attorney General's office on. But as long as the law puts the Department of Corrections in charge of this population, we believe we need to have oversight from the beginning of the commitment until they are discharged from the commitment. And we do want to improve any issues that the hospital or any other partner is having with regard to management and moving people through. Finally, this is just a side note. The Secure Psychiatric Unit is located on the campus of the New Hampshire State Prison for Men and the New Hampshire State Prison for Women, but it is not part of the prison. I am the director. It is a psychiatric unit. We're keeping our fingers crossed that money will be allocated to us for a new facility, but until that time, it is not a prison, as was mentioned earlier. It's much like saying the Department of Revenue is part of New Hampshire Hospital. They're just on the same campus. So I think that's all I'd like to testify to at this point. Be happy to answer any questions, and if there are none, I do appreciate your time this morning.
Senator Abar.
Thank you. Just to clarify, did I see in the news that the National Guard was deployed to the state prison for?
To the prison, that's correct, due to staffing shortage, but that doesn't affect these patients.
Oh, that was going to be my follow-up
Oh.
if I had one. Are any of these National Guards involved with the NGIs at all?
No.
No, thank you.
No, in fact, as I said, the Secure Psychiatric Unit is separate from the New Hampshire State Prison for Men, and we are very fortunate. I'm very pleased to say that both clinically and from the security officer perspective and nursing and psychiatric provider perspective, we have no nursing vacancies. Our officer vacancy is 18%, which is much better compared to other facilities. We have no clinician vacancies and no provider vacancies. So we're about as well staffed as we could be, especially from the clinical perspective. I hope that answered your question. Thank you for your time.
Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. From the Attorney General's office, my name is Miles Madison. I'm Chief of the Criminal Bureau. Just speaking briefly on this bill today, really concerns Sections 2 and Sections 3. As was mentioned, that language of the suffer significant impairment due to psychiatric illness. We were talking prior to this hearing relating to appropriate language there. I think the Attorney General's concerns are relating to consistency. So that language may be under-inclusive of individuals that we've had cases with in terms of the universe. So we want to make sure that this language is consistent with the admission standard, the readmission standard, and that it isn't excluding any cases, any individual subject to the cases that we have. So on that consistency, would note that the language in this bill just concerns the readmission standard. It doesn't touch the 651-8 B4 admission standard. So from our perspective, we want to make sure that the definitions we're using, the language that we're using is consistent across the various references. So we are having conversations and looking forward to further collaborations to try to ensure the most appropriate language.
Madam Chair, so the Attorney General doesn't have a position on, well, correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like the Attorney General doesn't have a position on this issue about removing this administrative approval from the TOC and giving it to the HHS.
That's correct. At this point, we're taking no position on that.
So you just want to make sure that the language is consistent throughout the chapters.
Yes, yes, and that we're not changing the standard in one section of the law.
Okay, thank you. Senator Abar.
Regarding readmission, I'm kind of lost as to where the breakdown is. If you could just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so the language here referencing 651.11a 2c would refer to readmission rather than the initial standard for admission. So our concern is we want to make sure that those standards are aligned and that it would be making sense to ensure that they're consistent rather than using mental disorder for the admission standard and suffer significant impairment due to psychiatric illness for the readmission standard. So it's really the same concern of ensuring that the references are consistent in terms of the definition that we're using across various sections.
May I ask how many times are we concerned with the readmission with NGIs? Is there a lot?
I don't have numbers to speak to at the moment. I can look into that to try to figure that out. Just from the legal process perspective, we want to make sure that the process is consistent using the same definitions at each step.
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Miles.
All right, thank you.
Right now, we have our last speaker, and that is Cynthia Babonis. Oh,
That's me.
okay. Hey, your name?
Karen Rosenberg. My writing's trouble with my.
You didn't sign in whether you were on to speak or not, so
Oh,
come on. Not a problem.
Good morning, and thank you for indulging me. I've got some tendonitis happening. I'm not used to having issues with writing. My name's Karen Rosenberg. I'm the policy director at the Disability Rights Center. We're the state's protection and advocacy system for people with disabilities. And in our work, we represent individuals with disabilities and matters connected with their disabilities, which includes people with mental illness. And over the years, we have represented and advised people who are NGRI and are in this predicament where they're at New Hampshire Hospital and the clinicians who are there on a daily basis working with them are not able to implement treatment decisions on a timely basis. And that's really disheartening for people, some of whom, like that we've heard from, who have been there for upwards of even more than a decade. So the treatment team members that are working with them know these people intimately, observe them daily, and the kinds of privileges we're talking about even include things like being able to get off the unit to go to a different, more appropriate group therapy session, or being able to go to the library, the cafeteria, supervised visits to the greenhouse, or things like that. We've heard from people who, when they were at the secure psychiatric unit, were able to experience sunshine, which, for a lot of us means something. Yet they've had to wait for months in order to get approval for their treatment team plan recommendations for them to get outside in a supervised way to the tea garden, which is, contained. So I think, from the perspective of an organization that represents people with disabilities, we see the harm that delay has for these people. It's really disheartening. It's hard to stay invested in your treatment when you know your treatment team is making recommendations for what may seem like small things to us, but we take for granted that we can go outside, or we can go to the library, or we can do all these things. And so these steps, this progress, enables them to be rewarded for their success, gives them an opportunity to test out their progress. The Department of Corrections is still involved in the treatment team. They, I believe, attend treatment team meetings, but there's already an additional process for NGRI patients at the hospital, to deal with risk issues. There's the Administrative Review Committee. So even after a treatment team makes a recommendation, this person ought to participate in Group A, for example, it goes to the ARC for their approval. So I'm hoping that you'll put the treatment team decisions or the clinical decisions with the clinicians and support SB 116. I can answer any questions if you'd like.
Thank you, Cynthia. Senator
Karen.
Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for taking my question.
Karen, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
You're framing it, in a very stark way for me as a civil rights issue, right? That the right to access sort of these basic things that we take for granted is at stake here. And so, but the other thing that you're putting in more stark contrasts for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that delays that we're experiencing right now, that could potentially be detrimental to their treatment because they would be less engaged or not willing to progress further because what's the point? Is that correct?
Exactly. It's just, like I said, it's disheartening for people. It's hard to stay engaged. And I think it's, sometimes we hear from people who will even say things like, there's disagreement and the Department of Corrections and New Hampshire Hospital can't agree on what to do with me and I'm stuck.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on Senate Bill 116 but has not been given the opportunity? With that, I will close the hearing. We will not be obviously executing this today. I will give the group a week to deal with it. If you can't, then we will re-refer it. Thank you.
The readmission thing.
Thank you, ma'am. Thought you were, yeah. That's why I was a little surprised. Wait a minute.
Were you ready?
I had a sec, I am ready. I'll wait my turn.
On behalf of Senator Pearl and being a co-sponsor of this bill with Senator Susi, who could have actually done this, I would introduce Senate Bill 95. It expands New Hampshire's laws regarding requirements for submission and filing of health insurance rates to include dental benefits. I know there's an amendment from the insurance department, so I'll stop there and we'll get on with it.
And I apologize. I'm used to going in numerical order and we are in descending numerical order. So, bring up DJ. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. Members of the committee, good morning. For the record, my name is DJ Betancourt. I have the pleasure of serving as the Deputy Commissioner of the New Hampshire Insurance Department. I'm joined by my colleague, Jason Dexter, who heads our Life and Health Division. We do not have a position on Senate Bill 95. It is a policy decision for the legislature to make, and as always, we will implement and enforce the policies given to us by the legislature to the very best of our ability. Before I bring up the 3 points that I wanted to share with you this morning, I did want to see if I could get acknowledgement of receipt for the amendment that we had emailed to the committee on Monday. Great. Okay. Yeah, and that amendment is just to be entirely sure that if you move forward with this policy, that it will apply to all of the players in this market. And I'm not here to pick on anybody by any means, but obviously Delta Dental has a very unique situation where they have their own statute in state law. So we wanted to make sure that this would apply to them as well, and that you didn't have any weird situation where they were somehow not included because of their unique situation. In terms of the 3 brief points that I wanted to bring to your consideration, I would first note that this is a notable change in our insurance regulatory ecosystem. Dental benefits are one of several products that are considered to be supplemental benefits. Now, to be very clear, it is not our position that dental health is any less important than the rest of the health benefits that people receive. We understand that they are all incredibly important to an individual's overall wellness. But I think that because you are going to significantly change that regulatory ecosystem, you just have to be aware of that, because this bill would remove dental benefits from their current arrangement and begin subjecting them to requirements and regulations that are similar to major medical products. And so that's a big change that you should be aware of. Secondly, while the department has not conducted a specific analysis of the MLR of the carriers that are in this market, we certainly do review the rates. Jason and his team do that. And there is nothing in the rates that have been filed that would suggest to us that the MLRs would be wildly skewed in a way that would have a meaningful impact on premiums. So it's important to note that the overall impact of this legislation is likely to be significantly smaller than you might anticipate. So a little bit of expectation setting there in terms of that point. And finally, I think that we need to make sure that as you approach this, you do so in a way that does not make it more difficult for new players to come into this market and compete. Obviously, we believe fundamentally that the more competitors you have in a market, the better it is for consumers, because those costs are able to come down. So those are the three major points. Jason, anything I've missed?
You got it all.
Very good. And with that, I'm happy to try to answer your questions.
Senator Avard.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. BJ, just regarding the regulations and major medical products, how does that affect the dental services? What are you saying as far as the
Wanna take that?
regulations?
Sure.
The regulation of health products is really in two buckets. You have a major medical bucket, and we have a series of statutes that all apply directly to major medical. It's in 415, it's in 420J, 420G, which is this statute, or these changes are based on, is all major medical regulations. 415A is there as well. And the design there is carves out all supplemental health products, and that includes disability, accident only, hospital indemnity, limited scope vision, limited scope dental. So right now, when you're regulating dental products, it's a completely different regulatory structure, much lighter than major medical. Major medical is everybody is interested in major medical. It's a huge product. It's fairly heavily regulated. So when you take in one section of that regulation of major medical, which is 420G, which deals with rates issues, underwriting, continuation, a lot of these heavily things that end up in major medical products, and you plug in dental, and you right now there's a clear exemption in 420G for dental. When you take that exception out and you plug in that statute, we're going to have to look at those differently. The rates will be reviewed differently. The products will be reviewed differently. Makes sense.
You may not be the one to ask this question, but why would we be changing it and putting Delta under major medical coverage or a different statute?
I don't think that we're attempting to put Delta Dental under a separate statute. I think what we're trying to do here is to ensure that because Delta's in such a unique situation, and because obviously they are a significant carrier in the dental market, that if you're going to move forward with this policy, that it applies to all of the players in that market equally.
And I understand that piece about the dental piece of it. I mean, the Delta piece of it. I'm talking about, are we moving, is this piece of legislation moving all of the dental providers, including Delta, into like a major medical? And what's the benefit?
we didn't write the bill, so it's a great question. And we're looking forward to some of those answers as well. I think it'll be a good conversation. I think our goal with the amendment we brought is if we're going to do this to the dental products, we have to bring in Delta. Because
Okay.
they have that unique statute in amongst themselves where they're excluded from lots of those other statutes that I mentioned earlier. And this is making sure they get brought in here.
I agree. If we move forward with this, then Delta has to be included in it. So I don't disagree with you there.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Michael Auerbach? Is this the question I ask you?
Good morning, Madam Chair, and through you to the members of the committee. For the record, my name is Michael Auerbach. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Dental Society. And on behalf of our nearly 1,100 member dentists, hygienists, and assistants and office staff, I am speaking to you today in support of SB 95. The NHDS mission statement, to which each member commits, advocates for the practice of dentistry and the patients we serve. By supporting this important legislation, the NHDS is seeking to help our patients save in the rising costs of dental care. The RSAs cited in this bill require that health insurance carriers report their profits so that the public is aware of the majority of premiums received and that they translate to cost savings and enhanced care for the patients. The dental benefit system has long been regulated separately from the rest of the healthcare insurance arena, just as oral health care has been separated from overall health care. SB 95 takes an important step towards integrating dental benefits into the state's medical insurance reporting requirements. Doing so will enhance the transparency of dental benefits providers to the benefit of our patients. We are also in favor of the proposed amendment that would waive Northeast Delta Dental's exemption, and I'll let Northeast Delta Dental, who is here, give greater clarification, should this bill be passed. We are grateful to Northeast Delta Dental for their willingness to work with us on this important medical loss reporting bill. Northeast Delta Dental, the state's largest dental benefits provider and administrator of the new adult Medicaid benefit, has repeatedly gone on record to report its medical loss ratio at over 90%, which means that 90% of its profits is returned to the consumer at cost savings or enhanced or expanded care. However, as previously indicated, the number of dental insurers doing business in New Hampshire is growing, and it is still unclear whether these benefits companies are operating under similar ratios. SB 95, therefore, enhances the transparency of the state's dental benefits industry. It is for these reasons that the NHDS respectfully requests that this committee vote ought to pass on SB 95. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the committee? So can you, so you're looking for more in order for the dental benefits to go under the same RSA as medical benefits, it's going to show more transparency?
We believe so, yes.
Okay. All right. No other questions?
You made me nervous. All right, thank you.
No one else here. I have Lindsay Nadeau from Cigna who opposes it. Would you like to speak on it? You say. Henry? All right. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on Senate Bill 95 that was not given the opportunity?
We got somebody in the corner.
Come on down.
Good morning, Chair Birdsell and members of the committee. My name is Brian Duffy. I'm the General Counsel at Northeast Delta Dental. I did submit written testimony in support of this bill via email yesterday afternoon. we have been in discussions with the Dental Society, and we understand the desire for transparency, and that is the reason we support the bill. I have to admit I have not had a chance to review the insurance department's amendment, so how we are brought into this bill affects our position on it, but that's all I have to say. If there are any questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer them.
All right. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Hold on.
Do you, excuse me, do you have the amendment from
I do not. I can reflect it from
right there?
Okay, thank you.
All right. If there's no one else that would like to speak on Senate Bill 95, we will end the hearing. Cam, when you get a minute, can you have him make a copy of that amendment? Because I didn't have it either. Neither did Senator Avard. Thank you. You ready? All right. Now I will open the hearing on Senate Bill 82 with the prime sponsor of Senator Susi. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Donna Susi, representing Senate District 18, which is comprised of the town of Litchfield and 5 wards in the city of Manchester. I never like to call legislation simple because that always leads to other problems. But what I will say is that Senate Bill 82 is straightforward. Senate Bill 82 merely attempts to ensure that claims are processed in a timely manner. A number of providers have indicated that they have experienced delays in getting claims fully adjudicated, processed, and paid. According to the current statute, this delay has resulted obviously in increased account receivables for the providers, in some case well beyond 90 days. Which makes things more difficult for them. It also creates a delay and an impact on patients, since when claims are not fully adjudicated, they can't send out explanation of benefits from the carrier and find out what the patient's balance due is either. So both of those do lead to some problems for the providers, and what this attempts to do is reduce and eliminate the ongoing issue of unresolved processing of claims. If the carriers have denied or suspended a claim, requested and received additional information from the provider, then the claim needs to be adjudicated within 45 days. After 45 days, if the carrier fails to act, the claim would be treated as a clean claim, a term already in the statute and defined in the statute as well. It would need to be resolved and paid at that point. So this is an attempt to just make sure that sort of a belt and suspenders, there is some language in the statute, but it doesn't seem to be enough to get the claims processed in a timely manner. And I do know there are some others that will follow my testimony that have some specific examples of those instances. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions, Madam Chair.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you. Paula Minahan? Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Paula Minahan, Senior Vice President, State Government Relations with the New Hampshire Hospital Association, representing all our hospitals. We are in strong support of Senate Bill 82, and we do appreciate Senator Susi sponsoring this bill, as well as all the co-sponsors with bipartisan support. The bill would amend the prompt pay statute under RSA 420J8, little a, I, b slightly. The bill before you is, I believe it is straightforward. The intent is to ensure that claims are in fact processed in a timely manner, and unfortunately our hospitals have experienced ongoing delays in having claims processed timely. And what 82 does is when, as Senator Susi stated, when the carrier either denies or suspends a claim, which is in current law, and the carrier receives the additional information that they are requesting from the hospital, again, current law, they must adjudicate the claim within 45 days, current law. The issue is that that is not happening. And so if that is not, if they don't adjudicate within 45 days, then the claim shall be treated as a clean claim, which is defined in current law. So what we added was the within 45 days, that the claim will be treated as a clean claim if not processed. These delays do cause issues. We have heard from our members that patients do get very confused because many months later they're getting a balance bill of the patient responsibility after the EOB or the explanation of benefits is issued, because it can't be issued until all of the claim adjudication process is done, and they get really confused because this could be a long time, many months later. So we're just asking that this, as I think what Senator Susi said is a good description, it's more belt and suspenders to ensure that, again, that the process just is more timely, because anything over 90 days is really concerning to our hospital CFOs, and we have many claims that are outstanding over 90 days, and we're just trying to address that issue by requesting this bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paula. I
Sure.
appreciate it. Just, I understand where we're going with this. Are there ever exceptions, like extenuating circumstances which require a delay?
Yes, I think the current law, I don't have the full law in front of me. I should have printed that off. There are exceptions, fraud, certain things that's already in current law that would allow for delays to do more investigation. But again, current law says you process within 15 calendar days for electronic, 30 for non-electronic paper. But if you are going to deny, then let the provider know within 45 days they need to receive that information. And then the problem is that then it doesn't move any further. So, but yes, there are extenuating circumstances. And I believe the current law really does articulate those pretty well.
So follow, thank you. So would this affect those that are going on, ongoing extenuating circumstances? So if there is a fraud case, if it's not adjudicated within 45 days, is it now clean? Or is that what you were just describing?
I believe the current law would
okay.
articulate, does articulate that those are exceptions. Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to tease out.
I can research it a little bit more, but I believe that that's already contemplated.
Right.
Oh, thank you, Senator. Let's see. Second page. Let's see. Exceptions, yes. So Roman 4 of the statute, exceptions to the requirement of this section are as follows. No health carrier shall be in violation of this section for a claim submitted by the carrier provider if failure to comply is caused by a directive from the court or a federal or state agency. The carrier is in liquidation or rehabilitation is operating in compliance with the court order. Carrier's compliance is rendered impossible due to matters beyond the carrier's control. No carrier shall be in violation of if any claim submitted more than 90 days after the service was rendered. No carrier shall be in violation while the claim is pending due to fraud investigation that has been reported to the state or federal agency or an internal or external review determination. So that's current law. Yeah.
I didn't see that.
Right, I know. Sorry, it's in the full prompt pay statute. Yeah. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Paul, I do have one. If it's already in law at 45 days, I know it's belt and suspenders. What makes us think that they're going to comply with this as well?
Because they would, then it turns into a clean claim, which the clean claim says you have to process the claim and pay it.
What is a clean claim?
That is defined in law. Sorry.
Sorry.
I know, my trusty assistant. I am very glad. Yes. Where is it? Clean claim? Means a claim for payment of covered healthcare expenses that is submitted to the carrier on the carrier's standard claim form using the most current published procedural codes with all the required fields completed with correct and complete information in accordance with the carrier's published filing requirements. So it is, you follow the law, you follow the rules, and then it's deemed clean, meaning you have to pay it. Unless you pend it or suspend it and you ask for additional information or deny it and say, then the provider has to act. So that's what current law says. Process it unless there's a problem. Then the carrier suspends, denies, pens it, requests additional information. Then the provider has 45 days to, then the provider responds. And then the carrier is to act on that within 45 days. The problem is we're seeing that they're not acting on it for a variety of reasons. So after 45 days, then it triggers it to be a clean claim. It's sort of like what we have now, because we have if they're not processing in a timely manner, there actually is interest that is supposed to be borne, and the provider has to kind of request that. But if they're not getting paid timely, our current law says that they can receive payment with interest. And so, I mean, that's another kind of belt and suspenders as well. But we're just trying to move this process along, because we do, again, after 90 days, that is a big red flag in the provider's accounts receivable. And we have a lot of claims that are over 90 days, which is a problem.
I have one more question. So when you say after 45 days, it becomes a clean claim, that means regardless of whether they think there's an issue with it, then it just goes to the patient and the patient pays that portion. Or the insurance company gets paid.
After the process,
Right.
if they requested additional information, then they shall adjudicate the claim within 45 days. So what happens is, again, sometimes the claim is just deemed clean and goes through.
Right.
But if they do deny or pend, which is the B section of the law, then they request that information from the provider. The provider provides it, medical records, whatever, clarification, usually medical records. So then the carrier has that. And then the law says they shall adjudicate within 45 days. And then, so the current law just says if the required notice is not provided, then the claim shall be treated as a clean claim. What we added was if they do not adjudicate the claim after that 45 days, they need to do something. If they review it by the medical director and they say, okay, we're going to pay half, we're going to pay all, we're going to not pay, but they're not doing that. They're not acting on the claim within 45 days in some instances. So when that happens, we're just saying this is kind of encouraging to just keep the process moving, because it's becoming a real problem. And again, the patient, I've heard of patients, hospitals have told me the patients call and they say, what is this bill from November of 22 when it's now, whatever, or 21 when it's back in, a year later. They get confused because it's such an old claim, but it's because the claim was not adjudicated in a timely manner. And that's all we're asking.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Bradley.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, under current law, the insurance company is supposed to adjudicate the claim within 45 days, but they're not. So what this proposal would do is put more of a burden because of the threat of automatically becoming a clean claim, correct? After 45 days, it becomes a clean claim.
Right.
So my question is, isn't this going to lead to more denials as a matter of course because you're running up against that 45 days? Are you not worried about that?
A denial would initiate, there's an appeal process. So in the contracts contemplate that. So they could appeal it. But what we are finding is eventually they do process the claim. It's well beyond the 45 days. That's the issue. So I don't believe that this is unreasonable. I think you get 15 days, and then you deny it or append it. You get the information, then the clock starts ticking. So then it's 45 days. After that, they have time to adjudicate the claim. It's to us that's not unreasonable. And what was I going to say?
I'm not saying it's unreasonable.
Okay.
What I am saying is, isn't it going to be an incentive for more denials because you're bumping up against a clean claim after 45 days?
Well-
Aren't you worried about that?
There needs.
You know what? Let me ask the commission.
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just on that, pushing that along, you would still need a basis to deny
Right,
it,
right.
right? And so I don't see that as a problem because you would still need a basis. They're not going to just deny it to deny it. They would need that basis, correct?
Because if you deny it, and is it patient liable, then the patient's going to get the bill. So I actually am not worried about that, because I don't think the carriers would do that. I think they do need a basis for that denial. And there is an appeal process. So I guess I'm not worried about that now that the more I think about it.
Follow up? Yeah. Right. And if they're going to deny it, they know that there's going to be an appeal process. So
Right.
they have every incentive not to have a sort of push
Which
denial.
causes more administrative burden for both providers and carriers. It's
Right. So my question is, do you see this as just another, I wouldn't call it an incentive or a disincentive, but a little shove to get on the process? Do you see it as a little shove
sure. It's yes, it's encouragement
for timely? Yeah.
to You're welcome.
I'm not sure it does a whole lot. Chris Nicolopoulos, I'm the insurance commissioner for New Hampshire. This statute 420 that we're amending is one of the statutes that we enforce. And so first off, I think we need to think of the world of claims, and we're talking tens of millions of claims are processed a year. The vast majority of them are paid under the 15 and 30 day process. And so that is, a claim comes in, it's expected by the insurance company, it's pre-auth or it's automatic coverage. If it was an electronic submission, it's paid in 15 days. If it's a paper, it's paid in 30. These pending or denied claims are a very small subset of those. As I kind of charted this out, I don't know that this language does anything different. I think someone made a reference that it's belt and suspenders. It's making it clear that after 45 days that it should be triggered back to A, which is what at the end of that paragraph, the language in the paragraph that's not being added says it goes back to A, which is needs to be paid. And so for those claims, we now know more clearly that for those pending claims where they don't issue another letter, that within 45 days it should be treated as a claim. I actually read that in the current language, but I don't think there's any issue here. Thank you.